budget and the IEBC. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming in. How is your morning?
I can't complain.
Where were you watching the budget from yesterday? The budget reading?
I was actually at Bunge, so I wanted
Really?
to have a bird's eye view of what's going on.
Clearly.
Yeah.
And did you get that?
Yes, I did. And this budget is very interesting. And a number of analysts, especially from the financial side, claim that it's a poor man's budget. But a careful reading of this budget tells you actually it's not a poor man's budget, because what affects the common man, especially the kerosene, the tax has not been made very friendly. And the majority of Kenyans suffer from housing crisis.
Yes.
Actually, there's housing insecurity in Kenya. And the tax incentive given to the property developers is for somebody who's putting up more than 1,000 units.
All right.
And these 1,000 units are not meant for the common man. It's not meant for Wanjiko. It's meant for the high-rise, the rich people.
All right.
Somebody who can buy a property maybe at 17 million and above. And I think the budget speech failed to capture that. They failed to give incentives to the property developers to come for property that a common man may be able to access.
So who do you think this budget is for?
Well, this budget is actually meant for the top people in society that the president described as the vendors. Yeah, it's for the elites. All these benefits given out are for the elites. And one is surprised that actually they will do this as we approach the election next year. Because when you look at Wanjiko, what affects Wanjiko really is the cost of kerosene. That's the biggest issue. That one was not captured. Housing was not captured, and security was not captured. And the rest of the allocations, I think, they're just, it's like a ritual.
All right.
And as a student of, I did accounting at some stage, when you're coming up with these budgets, you're supposed to justify why you have a particular budget. And you see what happens in the government.
The magnitude it has as well.
Yeah. So what they do is they keep on adding a certain amount of money every year, and there's not a single ministry which can justify the allocation. You recall they were given budgets last year, and nobody has told us that a particular ministry was given, say, 10 billion.
And this is what they
How
did
they
with the
use
money.
it? Yeah.
All right.
Yes. So you have no idea how they used the money. And then number two, and the most worrying, and also the minister did not capture this, is the wastage. We've had reports coming every single day saying that up to a third of this budget is going to be wasted, is going to corruption. The public servants seated somewhere.
The white elephant in the country right now.
Yeah, they're going to pinch this money, so at the end of the day, it will not get to Wanjiko.
All right, and even as we say that this is not a budget for the poor, the poor is being stated as it was like a give and take. Give with one hand and take with the other hand. And as you mentioned, we're heading into an electioneering period. What does this budget mean for the country at such a crucial point in time?
In mature democracies, people are elected to office, especially say in America or Britain, Singapore and South Korea. People get elected to office simply because of their budgets, because of the policy statements that are the issue ahead of an election. But unfortunately in Kenya, we don't care about policy issues. We don't interrogate these issues. The middle class person in Kenya, on average, is dead asleep. They don't understand these issues. So actually it doesn't matter. Even if the taxation on Wanjiko was increased to 200%, the people who are loyal to President Kenyatta will still vote for him because, they're fanatics. People loyal to Mr. Raila Odinga will still vote for him because they're fanatics. And this budget really, it doesn't capture the aspirations of the majority of Kenyans. However, for the selected, as you say, the elite, the selected persons, it captures the aspirations very well. Because, like, for instance, who are the biggest property developers in Kenya? It's the elite. Now their tax has come down to 20%, and most of them do over 1,000 units. So for them, they'll be smiling all the way to the bank. And when you go through again the statements, it's created an opportunity for tax avoidance. Again, the elite in Kenya who hide behind institutions called corporates will not be able to pay tax. But while Wanjiko, the moment you go to buy your kerosene, the moment you get into a matatu on your way to work, wherever you're doing business, you will still keep on paying a lot of taxation.
So do you think the CS should have done more to just relieve off the middle class and the poor specifically in the society?
That's what you would have done. But again, that's a philosophical argument, because it's claimed give the rich the opportunity to make more money so that they can employ the masses, so that there is a trickle down, they say, in economics. But really what the minister ought to have done, in my view, was to offer incentives, especially for the middle class. Because the middle class in Kenya, on average, they've got a car, they're paying a car loan on that, they've got a mortgage, they're struggling to pay for it. So you would have created an incentive to increase the housing stock in Kenya by freeing up a lot more land, and by saying that we are going to give incentives to the people who are coming up with houses, especially for the low-income areas. Because these guys who have been told that we are going to give you incentives and you're going to pay low tax, it's only meant for the rich. And then on the same note, Our biggest problem in Kenya is the people who pay tax. And the cabinet secretary did not tell us how he intends to increase the tax net. And yet, you know, Kenya has got a lot of property owners, the landlords. They never get to pay tax. And is not given very specific information or incentive how they're going to increase the tax base by ensuring that all landlords in Kenya pay taxes. But again, one would understand where the minister is coming from.
Yeah.
Because the people who are supposed to be paying taxes, the landlords, majority of them are the political elites. So they wouldn't want the minister to start taxing them.
Well, if we're good to go with how the Standard newspaper has broken it down, they say among the losers are women, the informal sector, the kerosene users, banks, fewer vehicle buyers, air passengers, landlords, and steel importers. Do you think these are the losers of the 2016-2017 budget?
Well, you know, the headline is very controversial. And I guess the editor, when he says the budget, it's women, it's about cosmetics. And there's a general assumption that it's actually the women who buy the cosmetics, so that they're going to suffer from that tax increase. But I think on when you look again at the losers, especially the banks, I don't see how banks are going to become losers, because, you know, they've been accused of a lot of improprieties, of misrunning banks, mismanaging banks. And when he says it's going to be a penalty, 50 million for any kind of mischief, I think that's a welcome venture. So that if you're running a bank, you know that if you engage in a mistake, then you're going to be penalized for it. So I don't think that's a lose for a bank. And that's meant to punish rogue managers of our commercial banks in Kenya. And again, when you look at for the vehicles, you recall in the past when you wanted to buy a vehicle, you were told that you have to pay a standard, a fixed rate of 200,000.
200,000, yes.
Yeah, that's when the people dealing the second-hand vehicles really complained. So when you have now 20% a variable rate, that sounds like welcome news. Yeah.
And the opposition, as we've read in one of the papers, the opposition has raised a concern with the amount of debt that we have accrued over the years and where we are now, especially since the Jubilee government came into power. I'm just about to take a look at the statistics before we get into that discussion of how big our budget is and the amount of debt we are in. Even as the CS Retich was reading out the budget yesterday, one of the things that came out clear on the social media was that Kenyans are very much concerned with the amount of money owed both externally and domestically. As of now, we have 3.2 trillion. That is an amount of debt, meaning every Kenyan or any Kenyan who is born already has a debt to pay. And let's just take a look at how our budget has been since the year 2013, when the Jubilee government was coming into power. 2013-2014, our budget was 1.6 trillion shillings. And 2014 to 2015, our budget went up again to 1.8 trillion shillings. It went up again in the 2015-2016 financial year to 2.2 trillion shillings, and even worse now, to 2016-2017 to 2.3 trillion shillings. Begs the question, where will we be next year? 2.5 trillion shillings, 2.7 trillion shillings? If we had to take a look at how the statistics have been, this was a conversation that was center stage on the social media yesterday. All right, and the major concern here is the amount of debt we are in as a country. When President Mwai Kibaki was leaving office, he left the country with a 2.0 trillion shilling debt. Probably, but the amount of debt that had been accrued over the years, say 20 to 30 years. But since 2013, when the Jubilee government came into office, to 2016, they've borrowed more than half what the country has borrowed in more than 20 years. Let's just first take a look at the statistics of the debt before we get into this and see how much debt we were in 2013. In 2013, we had 2.0 trillion debt. That is the debt we were left with President Uhuru Kenyatta, President Mwai Kibaki, beg your pardon, as he was leaving office. In 2014, our debt went up to 2.4 trillion shillings. 2015, 2.6 trillion shillings. 2016, 3.2 trillion shillings. That is the amount of money that Kenya owes owes both external and domestic bodies. 3.2 trillion shillings means this money will be paid by you, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and your great-great-great-grandchildren. Probably, if you would break it down, one was saying that every Kenyan owes the international community about 80,000 shillings. This is the situation we are in now, something that raised a lot of concern on the social media yesterday. Yes, we have a good budget. Yes, it is growing each and every year, but are we able to sustain it? Are we able to sustain the debt we are in? Are we plunging this country into a crisis? That is the discussion we're going to have now with Dismas Mukua on the kind of debt we are in as a country and whether this is a step towards the right direction or we are shooting ourselves on the foot. Dismas, have you seen those statistics? Are they alarming?
Well, it really depends on how you look at it. From two levels, they're actually not alarming. And in economics, they say when you can actually not run an economy without having to borrow money.
Yes, of course.
And the big question is, when you borrow this money, where does it go? And the sad story for Kenya is that in as much as we had hoped that these borrowed resources are going for infrastructure to build the economy, to catalyze the economic activities, that seems not to be the case. Majority of the resources are being deployed to, consumption and recurrent expenditure. So if you're borrowing money from the international bodies to come and finance the lifestyles of our public servants, then it means Kenya is at a loss, and that's where we are going to suffer. But had we borrowed money and we use it to put up infrastructure, put up, say, roads, facilities, it would be a different story. And the reports coming from the IMF and World Bank claiming that the majority of this money is actually going through corruption. And I know the opposition has said that most of these resources are financing these lifestyles of the public servants. Because, we have a bloated public service.
Yes.
And one is actually unable to understand what they do for this money. So if you're borrowing a lot of money and using it to pay salaries and a part of it going to corruption, then we're in a very bad place. And that's where one would have expected the cabinet secretary to be very specific, that we keep on borrowing. But are we putting up roads? Are we putting up bridges?
Is it helping us?
Yeah, it's not helping us, because this money is going to buy public servants a cup of tea in the office, buying newspapers on a daily basis. It's not going to roads. It's used to finance their unacceptable lifestyles, and it's going to corruption. And that's the source of concern. And when you look at this budget, then you cannot run away from the fact that we've got so many institutions which don't seem to be working. Like, for instance, the Auditor General's office. Every year, it keeps on complaining about poor systems that allow the public servants to steal, yet nobody has ever been prosecuted. When you go through that report, there are inconsistencies in all the 47 county governments and the national governments. And the head of the public service is on record as having said that a third of our budget is wasted. It goes through corruption. Then one would have expected that the cabinet secretary would have given more money to the investigative agencies to ensure that not a single coin is lost, and if it's lost, somebody is held liable. Like, for instance, when you talk about the saga at the NYS,
yes,
you have 1.8 billion shillings disappearing into a hole instead of creating opportunities for the Kenyan youth. And when the NYS was setting up, it was a very good idea. Initially, they wanted
and it was welcomed by so many people.
Yeah, by everybody. And they were going to employ more than 400,000 Kenyans annually. That would have gone a long way to manage our unemployment rates. Because when you look at Kenya, unemployment today stands at 40%. And then 90% of that 40% are youth under the age of 35. When you compare it with a country like, say, Rwanda, our neighbor, which is about 16%, and Singapore, which is 2%, simply we have a higher unemployment rate in Kenya because money is stolen from the public sector. And one would have expected the cabinet secretary to put more resources to stop that. But he did not do that. And then on the same note, how come the absorption rate in all these ministries is very low? It's actually about 15%.
Yeah.
So a ministry is given money every year, but at the end of the financial period, they have not used anything to reach. The only budgets they exploit are impressed. And you see one of the stories in the newspaper that the leadership in the National Assembly as well as the Senate are being accused of misusing imprest. When there's an allocation for buying newspapers and travel, that's when they utilize 100%. But for development expenditure, nobody's bothered. And I think that should be a source of concern for the president, that every year you're increasing the budget, but the money goes to waste.
Now, Dismas, last year, it was the end of last year, and even this year, the opposition has made so much noise about the Eurobond proceeds, claiming that some of it did not even get into the country, some of it was misappropriated and went into the pockets of a few people. The argument that was put forward by the National Treasury is that this money was taken to ministries. But the problem here is that it's not being broken down for Kenyans that this ministry was allocated this amount of money And this is what they did with this money. Is that a cause of concern in the country?
You know, there are many theories around the Eurobond as they are economists in Kenya. When you have economists leaning towards the Jubilee side, they'll tell you this is the best thing which has happened in Kenya, that the international markets have got a lot of confidence in Kenya. We're able to raise a lot of money, and it's going to the development budget or expenditure. But when you ask the National Treasury to tell you where did the money go, then the CS, Mr. Rotich, struggles to tell you where it goes. He says a number of, a big portion went to some services which are not supposed to engage in any sort of capital expenditure, like the Ministry of Planning. When you give the Ministry of Planning a lot of money, what are they supposed to do with this? They don't engage in any development expenditure. And then on the other side, Mr. Raila Odinga claims that this money was misallocated. And you know, he says that this money was lost, that the presidency has played around with the figures, and this money is supposed to be used for the electoral process next year. And there's nobody who is forthcoming with bulletproof information. The government is not able to convince you that this man actually came to Kenya, and you can point at a particular project. On that basis, majority of Kenyans think that there's actually something fishy going on at the Treasury. And you see, in the absence of Rotich giving us very clear information, then we tend to believe what Mr. Raila Odinga is saying, that this man has been misappropriated. And that's a crisis of communications from that ministry. When you have a huge budget like that, you should be able to tell us that we raised a certain amount of money and it's going to this particular project. If it's a road, we need to go and touch the road. If it's an hospital, we need to go and see it. If it's a bridge, we need to go and touch it, but that information is not available. So it's really very confusing. And in as much as Serikali is supposed to be Serikali, but we are supposed to have this information, because at the end of the day, as you indicated, our great-grandchildren will carry this liability, and they don't know what happened with it.
They don't even know what the money was spent on. All right, Dismas Mukua here says that the budget was for the elites, that there's so many loopholes that should have been filled there by Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich as he was presenting the budget to the National Assembly yesterday. What do you think back at home? Do you think this budget is for the Mwananchi or for the elite? Do you think that you will be able to see the proceeds of this budget financial year 2016-2017? 2.3 trillion is a lot of money. As the Mwananchi down at the grassroots level, what is your general feeling about the budget for the 2016-2017 financial year? We would love to hear from you. Do call us on the numbers on your screen. We'll definitely be taking a number of your calls just to see what the public feels about the budget that was, the 2.3 billion budget that was presented yesterday. And if you are unable to call, you can definitely engage us on the social media at KTN Morning Express, or you can tweet me at Akisa Wandera. We'll be reading out some of your questions and some of your sentiments on the budget 2016-2017. Of course, you can also text us on 22155. We'd love to hear from you here on KTN Morning Express. Get to it. We'll definitely be sampling that in a few minutes. But even as we're talking about the debt, what was said by the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury? Let's listen in.
In the tune of about 620 billion Kenya shillings, that will be funded in a combination of concessional loans from development partners. These are the multilaterals and bilaterals, which gives us very long-term concessional loans. We are also going to borrow domestically out to about 225, which is the same level as this financial year. So we have not raised it. It's almost the same level of borrowing. And obviously the other one is also commercial financing, which this time is, I think, is around about 120 billion Kenya shillings. So the sum of that is what it funds that deficit of about 620 billion. What is happening now over the last 4 months or so, we have seen very strong growth in revenues. And thanks to the new tax legislations that we had in place, we now see the full impact of the new excise bill, the excise tax, and also the reforms KRA has put, giving us a full stability in revenue collection.
Well, that is the CS yesterday being interviewed there by Abby Agina, talking about the deficit and how we are planning to fill that up. What do you think?
Well, you know, for me, really, the deficit is not an issue that needs to worry anybody. Because when you look at all economies, including the US, Singapore, China, India, they're actually running deficits. And wherever you get the resources to fill the deficits, it's not a source of concern, provided there's accountability. And right now, when you go to the international markets, you get a lot of money which comes cheap at almost no more than 2.5% interest. But what the minister must do, he must run away from borrowing from the local markets. Because when you look at our interest today, if you're in business and you're looking for resources to run your business, on average, the interest rates in Kenya are 25%.
Okay.
In as much as the Central Bank of Kenya says that they should be below 10%, but real time, when you go to a bank, they'll be telling you that you are going to pay about 25%. And if the government decides then to come to the local markets to do more borrowing, there's a high chance that the money will go, or rather the rates will go even to as high as 30%. Given that our commercial banks in Kenya are actually very lazy, they wouldn't want to give this money to Wanjiku to engage in business because of the risk associated.
Yeah.
They'd rather just buy the government securities and then sit back, enjoy their golf and wine, and they get resources. So it would be very important for the minister to not borrow from the local markets, go to the international way. But again, now when you go to the international way, you remember Mr. Raila Odinga has really rubbished the Eurobond.
Yeah.
So when they go back to the international markets, they'll be told, please account for us on how you've been using these resources.
Before we give you more.
And there is this fallacy coming from sections of Jubilee that when you do business with these investment banks in the US, you're not going to be held responsible. That those investment banks are like Caesar's wife beyond reproach. But what they forget is that the US Attorney General Loretta Lynch has had a number of those multinationals fined, the investment bankers, of engaging in a lot of mischief. But I think really at the end of the day, it's upon President Kenyatta to ensure that when money is borrowed in the name of the state of Kenya, nobody plays with that resource. That when it comes to Kenya, it goes for the intended purposes. And that a few corrupt public servants and cartels do not actually play around with that resource. And then at the end of the day, our great-grandchildren get a burden that they have no idea how the money was borrowed.
Let's talk about the tax relief measures that the tax measures that the CS mentioned yesterday as part of the plan to ensure that the economy is steady and whatnot. Do you think this would bring relief to Kenyans and at the same time help spur economic growth?
The reports released by Bloomberg, and Bloomberg is very authoritative. They said that the Kenyan economy is growing.
Yes, he actually quoted Bloomberg.
Yeah, and we expect it to grow 6.1%. But again, an interesting thing from this minister, when it suits him, he will give credit to international bodies. And when they criticize Kenya, he runs away, says those are neo-colonial masters. But I guess that's a story for another day. But when you look at the figures from Bloomberg, they claim that actually the economy is growing.
Yeah.
They claim that the real estate is growing, the agriculture space is growing, and construction is growing. But who is the prime beneficiary? Who is in real estate? Who is in construction? Who is in agriculture? It's this elite in Kenya. This budget does not in any way affect the common man. The common man in Kenya, Wanjiku, uses kerosene, and the tax on kerosene has gone up. Although on the flip side, there are some levies by NCA and NEMA which has been done away with, which the government is going to bear. Yeah. But again, when you look at those NCA levies, the principal beneficiaries are these property developers who are coming up with the big projects. Yeah. And NEMA, again, it's those property developers. You recall a minister by the name Chris Okemo once he said that when you are getting a bicycle from wherever in the world, it's going to come tax-free. Now, those are the kind of incentives that would make the common man happy. And you know, the person who is in charge of financing this tax burden in Kenya, it's the middle class. It's the one who really struggles to pay that tax. But on the same note, it's this middle class who is going to have to pay more to run their car, who is having to pay more for their mortgages. Because right now, if you're looking for a nice house and you want to get a mortgage maybe for a property in Kileleshwa, you are unlikely to buy a house whose mortgage income is not going to, or rather the mortgage expectation is less than 100,000. So how many Kenyans are able to buy a property where they're going to pay a rent or a mortgage of 100,000 per month? Now those are the people that the CS should have sorted out. But obviously, Kenya being Kenya, he was looking at the vendors, he was looking at the people who finance elections, and he was looking at the special interest groups who normally influence the writing of all these budgets. And you know, this is not only limited to Kenya. All over the world, if you're a poor man, you're working alone.
Let's talk about the Jubilee flagship projects and how they've been coming up since they came into government, the amount of money that has been spent there, and even as they seek re-election. We have the laptop projects, which has been allocated about 13 billion shillings. We also have the standard gauge railway that has been allocated 155.5 billion shillings. And we also have projects like LAPSIT and the Galana Kulalu irrigation scheme. What do you think about how these projects have been coming up, the amount of money that has been put in? Are we going to, are Kenyans going to reap from this?
You raise three fundamental questions. Number one, whether it's actually necessary for any government which comes to office to come up with their own flagship projects. Because you remember, through a consultative process, Kenya adopted Vision 2030.
Yes.
And we said generally this is a map to take us from one point to the rest. And it was agreed in a bipartisan manner. So when you have a new government coming to place and they say we are going to have our signature events, and then you ignore Vision 2030, then you come up with new projects
Your
from
projects,
scratch.
yeah.
Assuming that President Kenyatta doesn't win next year's election, what would happen if a new president comes, say President Dida? Would he come and again initiate another set of signature events for 5 years, and then another president
Just for
comes?
it to be his legacy.
Yeah, to be, So I think as a nation we need to approach these development projects using Vision 2030, so that it doesn't matter who's coming to office, but we have a generally agreed plan that this is the way we are moving. Because when you look at these projects by the Jubilee governments, they've been frustrated by special interest groups, because they're the people who financed the President Kenyatta during the election, and they said, we want to be given the first right of refusal. When you take office, we want to be the guys running LAPSET to supply computers and stuff like that. And when they're unable to get those contracts, they run to the judiciary, they go to the courts, and they stop those projects. So at the end of the day, the projects are not going to materialize, especially for the laptops. Part of the reason why it has taken a long time to be executed is of those special interest groups. And then at the end of the day, you say, we don't have a power supplied in all these schools.
Yeah, so did we really need this?
Do you want to give these guys a laptop? And instead of giving them laptops or tablets, why can't you say that you are going to have a computer lab in every school so that the people have got access to it? Because you remember, like not long ago, we had some vehicles called Mahindras, which were forced on the police service. And a few days later, all of them had collapsed. And one would have expected that for this digital learning, they would have created actually a laboratory in every school that every kid would access. Because you can take this to the bank, all those tablets or laptops supplied, in the next 2 years, all of them will be in a museum somewhere and they'll not be working. And
there's also a question of schools in the rural areas. This particular student or this particular pupils do not have a decent classroom to sit in, do not have electricity in their school. The facilities there are just below par. Does this child need a laptop? Or does this child need the facilities and the environment surrounding his study improved first?
Not long ago, there was a story, and actually it was on KTN, of kids having a class under a tree. Yeah. And there were birds making noise, and there were cows, there were lions all over. And you know, these kids are seated on rocks. So these kids, if you're very ambitious and you give them a laptop, how are they going to use this? Number one, the teachers have not been trained.
Yes,
the teachers don't know what a laptop
idea.
looks like. Yeah. And then you go ahead and you tell them these are the facilities you are going to use. That's why it would have been important to work on the basic infrastructure, the bare minimum, to ensure that every kid who wants to go to school actually sits in a classroom.
Yes.
And if you are not able to give them power through the grid, then you have the solar system. Then the next level would be you give them those computer labs. But trying to give them those laptops, I think they are shooting in the dark.
For projects like the Galana Kulalu, at some point it was stopped because of misappropriation of funds, and we're seeing it being given billions of shillings. I'm not quite, yes, about 12.2 billion shillings. This is a project that had been stopped temporarily because of corruption and misappropriation of funds. Then we go ahead and add more money on top of this. What are we saying?
I think probably there's a memo which must have been given to government officials that wherever there's any projects coming up, please go and steal. Ensure that you steal a lot of money. Because that's what is happening in all these projects. You remember the cost of producing maize in Galana is humongous. It beats economics. And then people are beginning to ask, traditionally, the area around Kitale, that's where you get your maize. So if you're going to have this project, say the cost of production is going to be much lower than Kitale, then what are you telling the commercial farmers in Kitale? What is going to happen to their livelihoods?
Yes.
But again, assuming that you don't care, that the economics doesn't make sense, then you go ahead with Galana. But a lot of money is being wasted. Till the president went to Israel the other day, and we got help from the Israeli on how to manage the project. But again, I think it's important for us not to lose sight that the majority of the government projects do not answer to basic economics.
Yes.
It must not have a very good return on investment. A number of them are prestige projects imposed by a particular government to say that we've done that. And a number of those projects are actually an opportunity for the top public servants to steal from the public coffers. So if you are really looking that any project which is going to be set up by the government is going to be very competitive, that's a really tall order. All over the world, the presidents come up with projects just for prestige purposes, so that when they leave office, they say, this is what I did. Like, for instance, when you look at the Eldoret International Airport, it doesn't do a lot of cargo, it doesn't do a lot of passenger, but it was forced by an administration because it was supposed to be a prestige project. And a number of these things that you refer to as the white elephants do not answer, they do not make economic sense, but our leadership forces it on us because Kenyans expect the leaders to give them money, and the politicians are not going to use their kitchen budgets to buy these helicopters all over they used to run around. They'll use the public coffers. And that's why the Auditor General comes in. When he identifies this kind of mischief, as the Anti-Corruption Authority going the extra mile to arrest them, and the Directorate of Public Prosecution, what are they doing about this? Nothing. That's why the budget read yesterday by Rotish. Next year we'll have this conversation, and a third will have been wasted. Wanjiku will still be crying. And
then the next year we'll still have the same conversation.
Yeah, but in the process, a few servants, rather, a few politicians and public servants will become millionaires and billionaires.
Wow. It's a country of 40 billionaires and...
Probably 45 billionaires and 45 million paupers.
Wow. All right. And before we wrap up on this topic about the budget and get into matters IABC, there was a report that was released yesterday, quite timely, by Ipsos Kenya on the budget 2015-2016. And 46% of Kenyans say that the budget did not help them in any way, and 48% of them, 46 say the budget did help them. They felt that it had improved their lives, but 48% felt that their lives had not improved in any way from the 2016-2017 budget. And most of those who are saying that it didn't help them in any way are people from Western province, who are 63%, Coast, Eastern, Nyanza. I hope you're marking the areas quite well, politically inclined. And then we had Northeastern with 48%, then Central with 43%, Nairobi 43%, and Rift Valley 40%. Those were the ones who were saying that their lives did not improve. And those who say that their lives really did improve, we start off with Rift Valley with 56%, Nairobi with 54%, and Central with 52%, Nyanza with 45%, and Northeastern, Eastern, Coast, and Western. What does this say?
You know, the problem in Kenya is that our politicians, that's President Kenyatta and Mr. Raila Odinga, with a lot of success, have been able to divide the country right in the middle. And depending on whom you speak with, if you speak with somebody who is fanatical about Mr. Raila Odinga, today they'll tell you the budget is a useless piece of paper. It doesn't help anybody. But if you speak to somebody who is aligned to President Kenyatta, they'll say this budget is a good piece of work. It shows the president's commitment to alleviate poverty and create opportunities.
So it really depends on where you are, your political inclination,
The people that were contacted for that opinion poll, the Ipsos opinion poll, number one, probably they don't know what a budget is. And even if you ask them today, what are the contents of this budget, they have no idea. But you know, when they are responding to the question, they want to be politically correct. They would say anything to make President Kenyatta happy.
Or to make...
If they are from Rift Valley, when you look at those counties from Rift Valley and Central Province, they would say this is the best budget since independence. The president understands the nation, he's got our interest at heart, and he's doing very well. But if you go to Nyanza province today, this morning, they will criticize. And chances are, when the budget was being read, folks say who are fanatical about Mr. Raila Odinga did not have time to watch the budget. They were probably watching soccer somewhere.
Or many of them say that They will watch the budget for us, then tell us. If they're happy, we are happy. If they're not happy, then we are not happy.
Yeah, you remember when we were going for the referendum for this, the current 2020 constitution?
Yes, the yes.
People said if
no.
Mr. Raila Odinga has gone through the documents and he says it's good, then it's good. If he says it's bad,
then it's bad.
If President Kenyatta says it's good, it's good. If it's bad, it's bad. And that's the tragedy we have in Kenya, that we become sycophants, including the middle class, a number of them with
and
a
even
PhD
the
in
political
economics.
Class.
Yeah. I mean, the political class for them, they're really afraid of the president and Mr. Raila Odinga. Like, for instance, I know we are going to talk about it. Yesterday when the president said, this is my path to sorting out the IEBC mess, everybody within Jubilee today, when they go to meet the president at State House, they'll dance and break it to a song and say, this is political
because
genius.
They know their re-election depends on that. But of course, let's just finish it up there with the budget. Dismas Mukwa there just breaking it down for us on what with things, giving us also a political analysis on what this budget means for the country even as we head into the electioneering period. Definitely, we would still love to hear from you on what you think. But as we go on to the next story, our very own Murimi Mwangi did a story on the IEBC, where we are coming from, where we are now. We're just about to run that story for you, just to set the pace for our conversation here with Dismas Mukwa on whether we are taking the right step. We're taking a step into the right direction with the statement done there or given out there by President Uhuru Kenyatta, flanked by Deputy President William Ruto in State House yesterday. I'm just expecting that we will be running that story in a bit before we start up that conversation. And that is just what Dismas finished up on, saying that the political class really wouldn't say anything that their leaders have not said, because this really depends on their re-election.
Yeah, if they do not...
The re-election depends on this.
Yeah, and if you don't dance to the drums of Raila Odinga or President Kenyatta, then you're not getting your nomination. And if you don't get a nomination, then you'll become Wanjiko, you'll be like the rest of Kenyans. So they've got the fear of God.
All right, so how did we get here? Let's just take a look at that story by Murimi Mwangi before we get back to our discussion.
It was the Court Sabasaba declaration in 2014 that seemingly muddied the political waters. Court leader Raila Odinga, who had just landed in Kenya after 3 months in Boston, was demanding for what he called national dialogue, failure to which court would call for a referendum to amend the 2010 constitution.
Siku ya Sabasaba mpaka tuketi chini sisi kama Wakenya na kuanza kuzungumza. Good afternoon.
But it was not until August 2014 when the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, IEBC, became the punching bag for the opposition chiefs. CORD launched a drive to collect 1 million signatures in support of the now flopped Okoa Kenya referendum push. And on 9th November 2015, the CORD Brigade presented over 1.4 million signatures to the IEBC. IEBC rejected 200,000 of these on March 2016.
That we cannot go to the next year's election with this IEBC. So it is in their own best interest to pack up and go.
We as commissioners are tired of being threatened every day. We can go home and other commissioners can come in, other Kenyans can come in. We are going to run our agenda with no limit as to our options. Judicial, extrajudicial, legal, extra-legal.
Constitution is clear. Nikijaribu kuwafukuza, watanipeleka kotini, koti itawarudisha iseme fuata taratibu.
Despite persistent calls by their Jubilee counterparts to push for electoral reform through Parliament, the CORD Brigade stuck to their guns. And in May and June this year, the IEBC standoff would put the country on the brink of anarchy as violence rocked different parts of the country during the court's weekly Monday protests against the IEBC. 5 people have already been killed, dozens wounded in the bloody confrontations between police and court supporters.
Did you agree any time frame?
An announcement by President Uhuru Kenyatta that Parliament will form a special joint select committee to look into the IEBC stalemate is seemingly the last glimmer of hope. Muremi Mwangi, KTN News in Nairobi.
Thank you very much, Murimi Mwangi, for that report. That just sets the tone for this discussion at this hour. Definitely later on, I'm seeing a lot of your views on Twitter and the other social media platforms on the discussion about the budget. I'll definitely be taking a look at your views before we finish up with this discussion. But let's cross over now to the IEBC standoff that we have witnessed for a few weeks now. Not even a few, actually a lot of weeks, for an issue as important as this. We've seen destruction of property, we've seen deaths, we've seen demonstrations every Monday, and there were threats that next week it would be Monday and Thursday. But finally, the president has come out and spoken. What do you think about his statement?
You know what the president said yesterday has come late by about 3 years.
Is it longer?
Yeah, it's long overdue. You recall when Raila Odinga came and people were saying, Baba, while you were away, this happened. That's when Raila called for dialogue. Of course, you know, he wanted a number of issues addressed. And it's very clear that Mr. Raila Odinga was not really interested in the actual dialogue affecting the nation because he doesn't want a lot of reforms to take place in Kenya. He's hoping to become president and sit where Kenyatta is with the kind of powers he has. So a number of the initiatives that the president Raila Odinga wants to drive are actually selfish interests. They're not, again, anchored on the needs of Wanjiku. But what President Kenyatta did yesterday, in political science, they refer to this as triangulation. And the first politician to use it was Bill Clinton when he was fighting for his re-election. He took a policy driven by the Republicans, owned it, and he ran with it. And recall there had been 2 issues. Jubilee was saying that we cannot have a conversation with IBC unless it's in the National Assembly.
Yes.
And Mr. Raila Odinga was saying, I don't believe in the tyranny of numbers, and there are a majority of the people in the National Assembly are actually voting machines. If you're Jubilee, you vote this way.
If you're CORD, you vote the other way.
This way.
Yeah.
Which seems to make a lot of sense. So what the President Kenyatta did yesterday was now triangulation. He did not go for the extreme side as advocated by the Jubilee hardliners to say that everything must take place in the National Assembly. He said it's going to be consultative. And it's interesting that he had a cup of tea with the religious leaders. You recall a few days ago he said IBC reforming IBC is so important and delicate, you're not going to have a discussion over a cup of tea. But the religious leaders went to State House, they had a cup of tea.
Very cup of tea.
And I suspect the majority of them were probably lawyers, so they really enjoyed the cup of tea. And they came up with this conversation. And the importance of a select committee is it's going to pick views from stakeholders across the nation. And one hopes that before they present the final document to the National Assembly and Senate for debate, it would have been agreed on by everybody. That when it goes to the National Assembly and Senate, the members in the National Assembly and Senate will actually be mechanical. It will be like a conveyor belt. Because there's a very high probability that this select committee, if it comes up with proposals, because the proposals of the select committee are not legally binding in the National Assembly or at the Senate. But one hopes that the proposals they'll come up with are going to be accepted by both parties. Because nobody wants Kenya to go back to the streets a few days to the election and have all these kind of damage. But again, I think it's important, as the President had indicated yesterday, for this select committee not to ignore the initiatives by Kabando Wakabando and Honorable David Ocheng from Ugenya, because, you know, it's a bipartisan group. They came up with very good ideas. And also the Chepkonga committee, they came up with very good ideas. And one would argue that for Kenya to make progress, President Kenyatta must now ensure that these folks, especially the hardliners within Jubilee, they tone down. And that Mr. Raila Odinga today, when he meets with these other principals and his advisors, that they do not again set conditions for them engaging in this conversation. Because Mr. Raila Odinga is given to shifting goalposts to achieve his selfish interests.
The Spanish paper called him a bully.
He's actually a bully.
The other day.
He's actually a bully. So one hopes that today again is not going to set very serious or rather unreasonable conditions, and he should allow the select committee to get the views from anybody who is interested, so that at the end of the day we get an IBC reformed. And you know, the reason why IBC is so important, when you have a democracy like Kenya, if IBC is not in a very good place, then they begin to poison that river of democracy.
Yeah.
Nothing will ever take place in Kenya if IBC is not sorted out. But again, on the flip side, Akisa, one wonders, those 9 commissioners at IBC, what are they still doing in office? When they see the country mood, can they see the sign on the wall? All of them are lawyers.
But it is a norm in this country that you hold on to office until you cannot hold anymore. Quite some time back, we had the then minister, was it Chris Murungaru, who said that I would rather die than resign. Yes, that was Amos Kimunya, beg your pardon. That was Amos Kimunya. I would rather die than leave office. So this is like the perception that we have when it comes to public officers, that I would rather die than resign, especially when there's a lot of pressure that is coming from different quarters that I should leave. But this is a question that has been asked by so many people on the social media, that why would the president wait that long? Why would the president wait for such protests to go on, for people to die, before taking that leadership stand he took yesterday?
Well, you've actually partially answered the question. According to the Star, they say that Raila Odinga is a bully. You give him the street, he's like a fish in water. And again, he's an institution. He actually thrives in chaos. And it's important for the president's advisors to realize that. That Mr. Raila Odinga, early enough, yeah. That he's going to get his way. And you recall when they started the demonstrations, initially they were only in Nairobi. But you know, they were spreading countrywide and causing a lot of unrest. And when he said that we will be having the demonstrations again every Thursday, that became a source of concern for the presidency, because Kenya was going to have a 3-day working week. And you know, given the fact from even the budget speech that 40% of Kenyans are unemployed and 90% of those are youth, it would be so easy to get a crowd coming to the streets every single day. And Mr. Raila Odinga has got the ability to make sure that Nairobi comes to a standstill. He has the ability to have a demonstration every day. And I think that's what the president feared. But again, he's come up with that strategy called triangulation. And at the end of the day, people are going to give the president a pat on the back. It's not, Raila Odinga is not going to take credit for this. And I think as soon as they do their media conference today, then now it's going to be in the ball of the president to ensure that IBC is sorted out. And more important is that the person who is going to cast their ballot in Mandera, in Kisii, in Viga, that vote must count. It's not the person who is counting the votes who is supposed to have the last word, but it's Nyambura or Kate or Onyango. That vote must count.
So is this a step towards the right direction?
It's a step, of course, in the right direction. But again, one hopes that it's going to be an overhauling of the entire institution, because it's not sufficient to kick the commissioners. You can kick the commissioners every single day. The sun comes from the east. But if you do not have systems and procedures to guarantee the integrity of the voting process, it's a waste of time. Actually, unknown to majority of Kenyans, the problem is not even the commissioners. They are the people who report to the commissioners, the various directors, the various managers. That's where the problem is. And the returning officers, because as the current law states, if you're running for a constituency and the returning officer says that you win by 10,000, you get 10,000 votes, I get 1,000. If the returning officer says that I've won, then you have to challenge that in court, and it may take even up to 1 year before that is reversed. So one hopes that we'll be able to reform the entire, the systems and procedures. And you see missing in all these conversations, where Raila Odinga says we need to sort out IBC, he's not come up with solutions. He just says we need to sort out IBC. It's not given as his blueprint that after kicking the commissioners, then how do you ensure that you have systems and procedures? It's not done that, and even Jubilee has not done that. Meaning, there are these two leaders, the president and his deputy. They want a system at IBC which they can manipulate. And if it doesn't serve your selfish interest, then you say we need to kick them out. But when it serves your selfish interest, then you break into a dance and song.
So moving forward, if we're going to get serious leadership skills, decent serious leadership skills from both President Uhuru Kenyatta and the opposition, what should Kenyans expect with regards to the talks on the IEBC?
You see, when President Kenyatta and Mr. Raila Odinga have a cup of tea, all the tensions in Kenya disappear. It's as if somebody, had I'm trying to use a good example, but it's not coming to mind. But it's, like you've been sick for a long time and you've been given an injection, and all over a sudden you're fit and feel, like a good horse. You remember last week before Madaraka Day, when Raila Odinga went to State House and they had a cup of tea, the temperatures in Kenya cooled down. It was very nice. You did not need an air conditioner. But now, all of a sudden, again, Raila starts complaining you need an air conditioner all the time. And one hopes that Mr. Raila Odinga is not going again to attempt to bully the entire nation by giving preconditions. He should present his proposal, and I think the select committee must ensure that everything is done in the open so that we are able to see what is going on. So one expects that actually Mr. Raila Odinga has got a proposal, number one, on how to kick out the commissioners, and then how to reform the entire IBC to ensure that every single vote counts. And that's what one would expect from Jubilee. But I suspect now the headliners in both political coalitions in CORD and Jubilee, right now they're one hell of a disappointed lot, because, you know, like you saw what happened yesterday, Maina Kamanda, Kamai Shungwa, and Ferdinand Watito, they were coming out to show the president that if CORD is organizing a demonstration in town,
also have the
you can count on us. And what was interesting is that the Jubilee demonstration yesterday was very peaceful, and
coming a day after
Nkaiseri had banned the demonstrations. Obviously, the demonstrations banned and the one done by Jubilee, the one for Jubilee does not fall in the category of the ones that are Nkaiseri banned. But you know what was interesting is that they were actually outside the president's office in town, Arambe Avenue, and they were addressed by the PS for Interior. And then they went all the way to Raila's office, which is a contradiction to the CORD demonstrations, which have been marred with violence. And various scientists claim that when you're having a demonstration and you see a policeman, your hormones rise and then you want to engage in violence. But if there's no policeman, it's peaceful.
All right. Let's take a call, Dismas, before we wrap up this segment. I understand we have a call from David from Nairobi. Thank you for joining us on KTN Morning Express. David, kindly give us your views on the topics we've been discussing at this hour with Dismas.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for panelists.
All right.
Yeah, and also the discussion is good. So for me, I just want to talk about the budget yesterday.
Yes.
Actually, personally, I stay in Huruma, and we were shocked. You know, personally, I'm not happy with the budget yesterday because it's not favoring the common mwananchi like me who is doing a jua kali job. And you know, wakati ambapo waziri anasema kwamba ameshukisha ushuru wa stove na vitu zingine zile ambazo ni ndogo ndogo, sisi tunashangaa kwamba ikiwa kwamba bei ya mafuta taa inaweza enda juu na bei ya vipodozi pia iende juu, tunaona kwamba sisi kama wananchi wa kawaida tunafinyiliwa. Kwa hivyo mimi kwa maoni yangu nilikuwa ninaona kwamba wakati ambapo mlikuwa mnazungumza pia nikalinganisha nchi hii yetu na nchi ya Tanzania. Hivi majuzi tuliona waziri wa Tanzania akijiuzuru na akiomba radhi kutoka kwa Mheshimiwa Rais. Na akamweleza Mheshimiwa Rais kwamba Mheshimiwa Rais, mimi ninaomba radhi kwamba uweze kunisamehe maana kazi hii imenishinda na nimejaribu kwa uwezo wangu, nimeona kwamba nimeshindwa, kwa hivyo ninaomba nisamehe mimi. Kwa hivyo sisi tunatazamia, ama mimi kama Mkenya natazamia kwamba haya masuala ya IBC na masuala mengine, kama mtu kwamba unaona kwamba huwezi ukafanya kazi ambayo inaridhisha wananchi wa kawaida ama kusaidia wananchi wa kawaida, ni vizuri tufikie mahali tuone viongozi wa Kenya pia wakijiuzulu kwamba hii kazi nimeshindwa.
All right.
Kwa hivyo
asante sana David. Thank you very much for joining us. That there is David from Huruma, who says he was quite disappointed by the budget today because it did not consider the poor in the society category that he puts himself in. That is something that you had mentioned earlier before David talked about it. And let me just take a look at some of your views on Twitter as well. I'll just sample like 2 or 3 messages here. And we have W. Gatoto on Twitter who says, why would Rotich seek to kill the new car dealers by increasing excise tax by 20%? And Major Opande on Twitter as well says, a lot of money usually goes back to the treasury. I've never seen balance brought forward in the budget reading. Inaenda wapi hii pesa? How about you answer him?
You know, David, I think he speaks for a majority of the Kenyans because majority of the so-called low-income earners, people who engage in basic businesses, somebody selling vegetables by the roadside, what they expect from this budget is a reduction in the cost of living. And we know that especially the cost of food. The cost of food should have come much lower. But obviously, you know, the CS was responding to special interest groups. David and company have got no opportunity to go before the cabinet secretary and do their presentations. And one would argue they've got elected members of the National Assembly and Senate. But unfortunately in Kenya, even if you're a poor man, the moment you get elected as an MP, then all of a sudden your social class changes, you become a rich man, and you're running over looking for business deals. So you no longer care about the interests of Wanjiku. And I think what what the CS ought to have done is really look at when a man in the village in Kibera or Kangemi is going to the shop on a daily basis, what actually do they buy? What they never miss out is on kerosene. And you should have ensured that, the kerosene is significantly reduced the cost so that that is sorted out. And then, of course, the issue of transport. Majority of people in Nairobi spend up to 30% of their monthly income on fare. And that's unacceptable. And the CS did not even address the issue of public transportation, because we need a public transportation which is, number one, cheap and predictable to sort out that issue. But fundamentally, is the case of housing insecurity. Again, as we said earlier on, there's no incentive for anybody to come up with low-cost housing. Because again, majority of Kenyans, they spend 30% of their income on transport and probably another 70% on their rental expectations.
All right. Yeah. So that will be our situation in this financial year. Yeah. Thank you very, very much, Dismas, for coming in and just helping us understand these issues. Dismas here was dissecting the issue of the budget that was read out yesterday by National Treasury Cabinet Secretary. He is a political analyst, and of course we'll delve into the aspect of the IEBC. Certainly a step towards the right direction by President Uhuru Kenyatta. A PG meeting by the Jubilee government by the Jubilee coalition will be done today for them to select the members that will be part of the talks and a number of stakeholders as well. All right, thank you very much for those who engaged with us in this conversation. I would have loved to read all your responses, but in respect of time, we'll just say thank you for engaging with us on this discussion. We'll take a short break. Do not go too far. Up next, I'm bringing you the news updates. What is big this hour?